The open peer review process, I suggest, we have to abolish all the blind peer reviews. The reason is it would identify the names and the affiliations of all the reviewers. The advantage of that is if you have a problem with the peer review comments, you can approach the reviewer, ask him or her directly.
This episode is the third part of our interview with Dr. Shanmugam.
You discuss the history of peer review, from its origins in Syria over 1,000 years ago to its formalization by the Royal Society in the 1600s and 1700s, and highlight problems like bias, groupthink, and rejection of innovative ideas, including Alfred Wegener's continental drift theory.
I would like to discuss peer review because it has implications for science in general. I got interested in peer review because of my PhD work. One of the chapters in my PhD dissertation is on the manganese distribution in carbonate fractions. The theory at the time was, if you look at the upper left diagram, when you go from the shelf to the slope to the basin, the manganese becomes higher and higher in carbonate fractions. So my co-author Benedict and myself thought, if we have this sequence available to us, we can check this theory, whether the theory is true or not. So we systematically sampled these rocks and measured the manganese content in the laboratory. As you can see from the curve, it goes a drastic increase in manganese as you go from the shelf to the basin. So it's a very good story. So we put together a paper and submitted to the Journal of Sedimentary Petrology at the time. And it got rejected. And the criticism was nothing substantial. The only thing we can think of is they're saying we don't have enough experience to talk about these problems. So we talked to our supervisor and he said, don't worry, submit to a journal in Europe. So we submitted the same paper, no change, to the Sedimentary Geology. It is published in Europe and it got published. The reviewer said, good. They didn't even make any suggestion for revision. So we have the same paper, content is the same. In one country, in America, it got rejected. And in Europe, it got accepted without revision. So there is something wrong here. So that's how I got interested in the origin and the background of peer review process. I found out Albert Einstein had a deep disdain for peer review. The reason is, he was coming up with all kind of original ideas. Nobody else can evaluate whether he's right or not, because he was the one who came up with it. That's one point. Before World War II, there are no any standard peer review process. The editor of the journal pretty much decided based on whether the article has any mathematical error or any original contribution. If the paper doesn't have any mathematical error and it has original contribution, he would publish it. Only after the Second World War, we had the very organized editorial board and so on. And it has got a lot of problems because the reviewers are anointed. They are anointed experts. Blind reviews problems have various problems. There are delays. If there is an orthodoxy, people try to defend it. And in one case, there are 8 Nobel Prize winners. They submitted their articles before winning the Nobel Prize to journals. They were rejected because of the peer review. After the rejection, they were considered for Nobel Prize, and they won the Nobel Prize. So there is something wrong here. The same idea got rejected by a peer-reviewed journal and was awarded Nobel Prize. So that was the reason I wrote this peer review article.
What does this story illustrate about flaws in peer review?
Okay, I would like to discuss this with a little bit of details because this deals with the orthodoxy. The high-density turbidity currents were considered as coarse-grained turbidity currents. My point was they were not truly turbidity currents. That's where the controversy started. I'll briefly explain what this is. At the bottom of the diagram, you see the red-colored area. They are the laminar flows. The yellow-colored areas are the turbulent flows. These are two different flow types in terms of fluid mechanics. You can think of it in a rheological term, stress versus strain. The yellow curve is the Newtonian fluid. That means when you apply stress, it immediately begins to deform. That's the turbidity current. The red dashed line is the Bingham plastic. When you apply stress, nothing happens until you reach a point of K, that is the strength. Then it begins to deform with increasing stress. That's the debris flow. So these are two different things rheologically, fluid mechanics wise. People combined these two and made it into a high density turbidity currents. So we wanted to show this difference in a flume experiments. So we spent $200,000, 2 years of research. This is the plume you see. This is at St. Anthony Falls Laboratory at University of Minnesota. We made this sandy debris flow slurry, which is in the bucket. We'll pour it into the flume and it generates this. You have a nice sandy debris flow at the bottom and a nice turbidity current at the top. So the basal one is a laminar flow. The upper one is a turbulent flow. You can see this clearly. The other authors in England, they showed similar aspects of the turbidity currents. There are researchers in California, they showed how the turbidity currents coming toward you, which is on the upper left, and the map view is on the lower left. And when they deposit, they form a nice normal grading shown by the yellow arrow on the right-hand side. That's what we call a turbidite, that is a deposit of a turbidity current. When you go to the northern Spain, near beach, the Zumaya beach, you will see these turbidites, big valves, beautifully exposed. So I put all this together, submitted this article to the Journal of Sedimentary Research. The editor-in-chief of the journal at that time was one Dr. John Southard. He was a professor at MIT. This is important because he was an expert on fluid mechanics. So he distributed this for peer reviewed. He got mixed reviews for my paper. But the associate editor recommended rejection of the paper. But John Southard overruled the rejection and said he is going to publish it because he wanted to see discussion on this complex topic. Maybe we will learn from the discussion. So he published it. But there was no discussion. They waited for 6 years. Then the International Association of Sedimentologists, they conducted a survey during these past 6 years. The top 10 most cited articles in 3 top journals called Journal of Sedimentary Research, Sedimentology, Sedimentary Geology. In that survey, they found out my article was the number 1 most cited article during that 6-year period. So the lesson from this, if John Southard followed the peer review process and rejected my paper, we would have missed all this information because of the wrong peer review process.
You propose adopting open peer review as a fix for issues like inconsistency, politics, and fake reviews. Could you explain open peer review and why it would improve the scientific process?
The open peer review process, I suggest, we have to abolish all the blind peer reviews. The reason is it would identify the names and the affiliations of all the reviewers. The advantage of that is if you have a problem with the peer review comments, you can approach the reviewer, ask him or her directly. So that's the advantage. So we should abolish the blind review process and start a open peer review process.
As of February 4th, 2026, your work has garnered over 241,000 reads on ResearchGate, nearly 14,000 citations on Google Scholar, and 362 highly influential citations on Semantic Scholar. What advice do you have for young scientists building their own influence?
Metrics are very good. For a geologist, this is the topics I'm publishing as very local and so on. Particularly the bottom one, the Semantic Scholar. It was organized and completely by AI. By the way, that was introduced by Paul Allen, and he was the co-founder of the Microsoft Corporation along with Bill Gates. So he started Allen Industries for Artificial Intelligence. That's the one that puts out these numbers. I got 362 means it's very important so to get such a high number, because that suggests my articles are very transformative. They are not just regular scientific articles. They have great influence. So the reason my articles have this impact is my publications offer something that is increasingly scarce in climate discourse. For example, they deal with interdisciplinary synthesis. Like, for example, I combine physics, geology, and climate, paleontology, and things like that. Long-term scientific memory, empirical grounding. I always go out and gather data. Like I mentioned, I gathered 80,302 data points on the CO2 measurements. Willingness to challenge orthodoxy. If something is wrong, point out so that people will know what the controversy is. And then relevance to developing nations, like the one I showed from Sri Lanka. So if you combine all this, I think it has a greater potential to impact for long-term change as far as the climate discussion goes.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest risks and rewards in the CO2 debate?
We should eliminate the climate scam. That's what's going on. People are making money using the climate change. So we have to eliminate the climate scam. The way to do it is these procedures. We saturate the media with empirical data. We communicate at all age levels, from kindergarten to college or beyond. Communicate at all age levels and articulate message with clarity. If there is a confusion, make sure that you don't confuse it further. Motivate the youth. This is probably the most important aspect of the whole thing. I'll give you a few examples in completing this discussion. For example, in 2023, the World Economic Forum was held in Davos. All the global elites took their private jets, went to Davos. These jets emit enormous amount of CO2. Once they reach, and they preach to the world that we should reduce CO2 emissions. This is the ultimate in climate hypocrisy. So we should point this out to people so that people know when Al Gore and Bill Gates go to Davos using their private jets, what is the real reason they are doing this. And then whenever there is a natural severe event happens, like tsunami or a cyclone or a tornado, the local weathermen always relate this to CO2 emission by people driving cars and things like that. We can actually test and verify these events, how they form and things like that. I'll take one example. This is the Hurricane Floyd, and I published a major article in the AAPG Bulletin in 2008, talking about hurricanes and tsunamis, how they form and so on. I'll just show this example. is the cause of this hurricane, people say, is the anthropogenic global warming. That is, people use cars, emit CO2, that increases all kind of changes, temperature, and cause global warming and lead to hurricanes. Is it true? We can actually test this. This is the sea surface temperature of the world. And there are hurricanes found mainly in the central part, about 500 kilometers on both sides of the equator, because the ocean is warm there. So there are 7 factors that control the origin of hurricanes, starting with the 500 kilometer from the equator, warm ocean, and unstable atmosphere, moist layer, low wind shear, disturbance, and so on. If you look at the Atlantic Ocean, just west of Africa, there is a blue dot. That's where almost all the hurricanes that hit America, not the eastern part of America and the Gulf of Mexico. This spot where they originate is called Cape Verde Island. This is a plot of hurricane track plotted from 1851 to 2019, covering 168 years. As you can see, all the hurricanes come on the Gulf and the east coast of North America. Now, if the people are responsible for generating these hurricanes, then this island should be loaded with a lot of people. If you rank the population, it is ranked 172nd in the world. In terms of CO2 emissions, it's ranked 177th in the world. So if that is the case, how come all these hurricanes are generated at this location? The reason is very simple. It has nothing to do with people or CO2 emissions. It has everything to do with those 7 factors I mentioned earlier. The other factor is the IPCC and other organizations push this green energy, wind and solar. Let's see how they perform. The one on the left is called the Crescent Dune Star Project in Nevada. It went bankrupt 2020. Do you know the price? $1 billion, that B in billion. Then if you take the one on the right, it's called Solindra Project. It went bankrupt in 2011. At that time, the president was President Obama. It cost the government nearly $535 million. It went bankrupt. If you look at the wind farms, they kill birds, they kill whales. So these are, you can observe, these are facts that you can go and study. The most obvious thing is human physiology. When a human inhales, that person inhales CO2 from an atmosphere that has 400 parts per million. That's on the left in green. When that person exhales 53,000 parts per million CO2. That is 132 times that he or she inhales. What this means is human lungs are much more capable of adapting to higher CO2. For example, if you increase the CO2 from 400 to 800 parts per million, it means nothing to human beings in terms of their breathing habits. They will do fine. That's the reason I showed in an earlier graph that humans perform fine up to 10,000 parts per million. These are observable, verifiable data in front of us. This is what we have to communicate to the world to stop the climate scam. So, to summarize my talk, I can say this is the climate truth. There is no climate crisis. There is no climate emergency. There is no climate catastrophe. There is no existential threat. Just leave the planet, people, and CO2 alone. We'll be fine. My study would not have been possible without hundreds and hundreds of people who helped me during the past 60 years. I just selected a few here. One, Professor William Happer. He helped me so much. I don't have time to go through all of them. He is the current chairman of CO2 Coalition. Next, Angela Wheeler. She and I have a constant communication via emails and phones and things like that. Jane Breslow, he was mainly responsible for me joining the CO2 coalition along with Will Happer. Ethan, who helped it today with the technical aspect of things. Muthuswamy Iyer, who wanted me to become a geologist, leaving my job as a science teacher. Parthasarathi, he was the IIT professor who trained me in soil mechanics, petroleum engineering, and so on. Stanley Fisher was my thesis advisor at Ohio University. He helped me when I came to this country with a lot of both the financial and academic areas. Kenneth Walker, my PhD advisor, he made me to what I am today as a scientist. Garrett Briggs, who was the one who got me interview with Mobil Company. And DeVries Klein, he was a famous professor in geology. He was the one who introduced me to climate change in 1988 when the IPCC was founded. Santanu Banerjee, he is the head of the Department of Earth Science at IIT Bombay. He helped me throughout. Ram Kumar, he is the head of the department at Annamala University. He helped me a great deal. Professor Nayak, he is the president of Indian Association of Sedimentologists. He has been a great help. Professor Bhatt, he is the editor-in-chief of most of the Indian journals where I published. Dr. Bashir, he was the managing editor of these Indian journals. Dr. Chandrasekaran, he was the head of the department at IIT Bombay, and then he was the one who invited me to submit the paper to the Bulletin of the Mineral Research and Exploration published out of Turkey that was reviewed by Happer and Demuth, and that will become one of the most influential articles. Then Demuth, he has been a long-time colleague of mine from Mobil to today. He has been very helpful in a lot of ways. And Arvind Kumar Singh, he helped me during my talk at the BSIP. And Elizabeth Happer, she is the younger sister of Will Happer. She helped me with providing photographs, family information, and so on. Then Vaidiswaran, that's my niece's husband, he helped me with all the technical computer issues. My niece Geeta, she has been a strong supporter and help during my career the last several decades. Mobil Oil Company, that I already mentioned. And of course, finally, my wife, she has been helping me since 1976 when we got married. And this year, we are celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. I would like to take this opportunity to respond to two common criticisms leveled against me. The first criticism is that I publish only in Indian and Turkish journals. My response is that countries in the global south are the ones that suffer the most due to unfair climate policies imposed by the West. Therefore, I focus on the global south. The second criticism is that I do not have the required academic credentials to discuss climate change. I find this criticism is rather rich in hypocrisy for two reasons. First, my academic training at IIT Bombay and my research position with Mobil Oil Company in Dallas, Texas for 22 years dealt with oil, natural gas, and coal, the underpinning factors of climate change and net zero debates. Second, the only person who ever won the Nobel Prize for contributions on man-made climate change was Mr. Al Gore. His academic credential is a BA degree in government from Harvard University in 1969. My credential is a PhD in geology from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in 1978. Thank you all for watching this 3-part series on Climate Debrief.
Thank you for watching. The Climate Debrief podcast is funded by listeners like you. If you enjoyed listening to this episode of Climate Debrief, please like, comment, and subscribe. We read all of your feedback. If you are interested in finding out more about the CO2 Coalition and its mission, visit our website at co2coalition.org. Our host and executive producer is Angela Wheeler. Production by Ethan Audie and Scott Wheeler. Technical production and editing by Joseph von Spakovsky.